Alright guys, welcome back to another experimental day in the shop. So you guys remember last week I put out a video talking about milk paint and aniline stain. Now in that video we tested out some aniline stain and that was the result. Now that is a completely disgusting, horrible looking product and I don't want to use that on any of my projects. So on that video I got a comment from TWC, who's a longtime subscriber, letting me know that my favorite brand of finishes, Tried and True, makes a stain. Now I'd never heard of this before, so as soon as I saw his comment I hopped onto Google and went on the absolute hunt to see where I could buy this stuff. So I couldn't find anywhere locally, but luckily I found a place in Quebec, and just yesterday the box finally arrived, and you guys are so lucky that I was patient and didn't just go and test these out last night. So what you guys are going to be seeing today is me testing these out for the very first time. So I also ordered some leather polish and more Tried and True original oil because I was running out, and now I have another full can and I'm excited about that. But anyway, for the stains, the first one I got is Java. So this one is supposed to be just kind of a darker brown. It looks pretty good on their little sample image here. The other one I got is Dark Walnut because, again, I like darker colors. I generally like darker stains too. So again, very excited to try that out. So I believe that there are 3 other colors of the stains made by Tried and True. I believe it's cherry, mahogany, and golden oak. I believe they're the 3. So I plan at some point to get those other 3 to test out too, because the golden oak I'm especially interested in, mahogany I'm kind of interested in too, and cherry I'm honestly really interested in too, because in general I'm really intrigued by these stains. So what makes these special is that these are an all-natural stain. So if you don't know anything about the brand Tried and True, their whole thing is that they make a natural finish. The Tried and True original oil, which is one of my favorite finishes for furniture, cutting boards, bowls, whatever it may be, is a simple mixture of boiled linseed oil and beeswax. When I was reading on their site, basically this Tried and True stain, all it is the same linseed oil that's in their normal finishes that I really like, mixed with pigment. So I am super excited to test this stuff out because this solves my whole issue with stains. Much like I've talked about in the past, I absolutely hate using, modern paints, modern stains, even modern finishes like polyurethane, because I just really don't like how they work. And I generally prefer my stuff to be non-toxic like this, because you could quite literally use this on, cutting boards, bowls, whatever, to add a little bit of different color. So as far as my finishing techniques, I go full traditional. I like linseed oil, I like beeswax. I believe the varnish oil that they sell is also has pine resin in it. I like those all natural finishes because that's just what I like. I hate dealing with any kind of chemicals, which is why I've gone hardcore to adopting Tried and True as my go-to brand. Now, I should mention here, this is not sponsored by Tried and True. I really wish it was. They are the one company that I would love to take on a partnership deal or some kind of sponsorship with. But hopefully someday that'll happen. Until then, I will just keep giving them all the free promotion for their products because I think that they make great stuff and I'm really excited to see how this stain works. So we're going to be testing out the Dark Walnut and the Java stain from Tried and True on all the woods that I typically work with. So we're going to be testing it on some walnut, some white oak, some cherry, some maple, and some ash. I believe that is everything that I have here that I kind of typically use. And all I want to find out is how these different colors react with the different colors of the natural wood. So I'm guessing that like dark walnut on the walnut might actually be something kind of interesting. I want to see what the stain does with the different colors of the wood to just create something different. So we're just going to do a quick milling session, make a bunch of sample pieces that I can then apply the stain to. Then we'll go through and apply the stain to those samples and just see how things turn out. So we got all 5 of these pieces finished up to the same standard that I do on any of my pieces of furniture. So I took them through the drum sander up to 220 grit, and then I finished them off with 180 grit hand sanding to just clean up any of the marks. There's always some components that are done with the random orbital sander, but I always finished all of my components with 180 grit hand sanding, so this should give me pretty reliable results. Once we've tested these pieces, what I'm going to do is I'm going to flip them over and we're going to hand plane the backside of these and test the same stains on them to see if that actually has a difference. The only real potential difference is that the hand plane will leave the surface a little bit more open. So if we go hand plane, then finish it off with 180 grit hand sanding, the pores will be a little bit more open compared to what we've done here, where we took them all the way from 80 grit up to 220 grit and then back down to 180 with the hand sanding. So the pores of these pieces of wood are definitely a lot more sealed compared to using like a hand plane and 180 grit. So to go through our samples real quick, on the right side here we have ash, the next one is hard maple, the middle one here is white oak, the next one is cherry, and then the last one is walnut. Okay, so these are some really interesting results. First thing I want to note about these stains is I don't know if it's just my sense of smell that's screwed up, but all I can think of right now is banana bread. Both of these stains, as soon as I open the cans, I just have that instant smell of banana bread. But anyway, going through the results here, the ash is probably the best one to actually show off the results. So on this side here, we have the Java, and on this side here, we have the dark walnut. Now, it's gonna be really hard to pick it up on camera to get those subtle changes in color there. These two stains are very, very close. The only real difference between them is the undertones. So you can see kind of in the undertones of the grain there on the ash, you get very kind of dark gray, black, almost undertone. Whereas with the dark walnut, they're much more brown undertones. So it's, again, it kind of sucks that you're not gonna be able to pick it up on camera because it's a very, very subtle difference, but it is one that it could definitely come into play on a project. But next up with the maple here, that does highlight a little bit of the difference between the Java and the walnut. So you can see that the walnut is definitely a little more on the brown side. The Java has a little bit of a darker undertone to it. Overall, I know that maple was not going to stain very nicely, but we're going to have to wait and see until after we do another coat on the maple. Maybe that'll change, maybe that'll help it. But yeah, for now, probably not a wood that I want to stain, not a wood that I particularly like working with anyway. So next up with the white oak, again, much like the ash, is a very subtle difference. On this side, we've got Java with a little bit of those darker undertones, and on this side, we've got dark walnut with a little more of those brown undertones. I know it's super hard to tell on camera. I will try and do as much as I can in the editing. Now, those three were kind of obvious. You know, you could tell there's a very obvious physical color change by adding in the stain. The trick is next with the cherry and the walnut, because for these ones, I applied the oil on the Java side and I was like, wow, it looks great. But then I had to kind of snap it out of my brain that, oh yeah, we're dealing with walnut and cherry. When you apply oil to these two woods, they generally have a very drastic color change, as we saw on the blanket chest, which you can see sitting behind me there. They have a pretty significant color change when you just put oil to them anyway. So the stain doesn't actually do very much. But on the cherry here, it definitely brought in those two very different undertones. So on this side here with the Java, we're getting a little bit more of those dark undertones coming in. A cherry is another one of those woods that I don't think is very good for staining because it's got very tight pores to it. So we definitely have kind of splotchiness or just, you know, with the really small pores, those are the areas that kind of suck up the pigments a lot. So it definitely doesn't look great. And then on the other side, we've got the dark walnut, and this one I actually really like the difference here that it makes. Because where the Java pigments kind of clash with the natural color of cherry, so where they've soaked in the pores and the pigment is just kind of sitting there, with the dark walnut pigments, they are definitely sitting in a lot of those open pores, but they blend really well with the cherry. So I could definitely see using this stain on something like the blanket chest that I just finished off to just give it a little bit of a darker, richer color. Just something that is slightly different than your normal cherry. Then the last one is the walnut. Now here, again, it's very hard to tell a difference. Even in person, it's very subtle. But again, the Java has slightly darker undertones and a lot of that grain. Then the dark walnut overall has, you know, just kind of looks like normal walnut, if I'm being honest. It just looks like the natural color that walnut is when you apply an oil to it. So on the can, it says that you can recoat these pieces after 8 hours. So I'm gonna leave all these pieces, let the stain just dry and cure up for about 8 hours. I'm gonna come back, buff it with a maroon Scotch-Brite pad so that we open up the pores just a little bit more. Then we'll recoat these with the corresponding stains and we'll see if that darkens up the color, if it changes anything, you know, just kind of what it does. So it is a day later now, and I've gone through and I've applied 3 coats of oil on all of our main test pieces, as well as a couple of our hand plane pieces. But first off, going through the color, definitely doing more coats emphasize the difference between the two stains. Most notably on the ash here, our walnut is definitely looking a little more on the brown side, and the Java is looking more a little bit on the kind of the darker brown, blackish side. So adding more coats of the stain definitely helped to define the color difference just a little bit more. So on our main sample pieces, like I said at the very beginning of the video, my only expectation here was for these stains to work well on the white oak and the ash, because those are two woods with very open pores, so they actually have the ability to take in that pigment to change color a little bit compared to stuff like the maple, the cherry, or the walnut. Those 3 woods have fairly tight pores and don't have the ability to soak up as much of that color and pigment compared to the ash and the white oak. So as far as these 2 stains go, I can definitely see myself using them on ash or even white oak to change up the colors just a little bit, especially on ash, because the thing that I like about ash is it's a very inexpensive hardwood, which means I could buy more of it, which means I can make more projects, which is always good. But the problem with it is that it's a very gross color. It's kind of this like off yellowy white color when it's finished, which I really don't like. So being able to use either the Java or the dark walnut stain to just bring it to a little bit of a nicer color, I think is very good. And so I think the best way to describe this is on the ash with the dark walnut stain, you're getting kind of a golden oak color. So that's very confusing because they also have a golden oak stain. But yeah, that's the best way I can think to describe it, because with the light color of the ash mixed with kind of the darker tones of the pigments in that stain, you're making that ash look almost comparable to white oak, to just natural white oak. So that is a benefit in and of itself. So one thing I want to bring up about these stains is that I'm not super impressed with them. I like how they turned out on both the ash and the white oak, but the problem is that I feel like Tried and True has kind of misrepresented these stains on their website, and I'm going to show you guys some pictures here to prove my point. So on their website, they show the dark walnut stain on dark walnut, and their sample piece on one side is a piece of just raw normal walnut before it's ever been oiled, and on the other side it's got that dark walnut stain on it. Now obviously anyone who's ever used a linseed oil based product, has ever even used Tried and True's own finishes, knows that as soon as you put any of their oils on a piece of walnut, it's going to look like that. So the stain is not being shown in that image whatsoever, and it's making it look like, okay, well, if you apply this stain to white oak, ash, whatever, you're gonna make it look like walnut, which is extremely deceiving in my opinion. Same thing with the Java. The sample they have on there, as far as I can tell, it is either soft or hard maple. I'm not sure which one is gonna get that color more, but as you can very obviously see, I have a piece of maple here that I finished with their Java stain that does not look anything like that image. So I'm not sure how they managed to get that kind of a reaction with their stain and whatever wood they use, but for the life of me, I cannot get the piece of wood to look anything like that. And so that makes me very concerned about the other three stains that they have, about what their actual colors are, because again, same thing with their cherry stain. They show it on cherry, which much like the walnut probably is not showing anything. They need to show the samples of their stains on a consistent type of wood. So if you show all your stains on a wood like white oak or ash or maple, something that doesn't have already a very definitive color like cherry or walnut, you need to show these stains on a consistent wood all the way through so that your customers can actually see what the stain does or what the stain is, what colors it is. Because again, showing the dark walnut linseed oil based stain on a piece of walnut is completely misleading, because as you can very easily tell from this piece of ash, by putting that dark walnut stain on there, this doesn't look anything like walnut. There's no walnut coloring whatsoever in this piece of wood after staining it with the dark walnut stain. It has a little bit more brown tones to it, sure, but it doesn't look anything like the sample that they're showing on their website. So in my opinion, that's very, very misleading, and I hope that if anyone from Tried and True ever sees this video, I'm not trying to insult the company, I'm not trying to say anything bad, I would just really appreciate it if they would make that change on their website, and I could happily provide some samples if need be. The other thing I want to say about these stains is I don't know if I'd really consider them a stain, but I also don't know if there is another word for what these would be. Because the trick is that they don't really change the overall color of the wood. Yes, obviously they do change the color of the wood slightly, but if you've ever tried like a Minwax or a General Finishes stain, and you've played around with those more modern stains, stuff that uses all these random chemicals in that, those stains will significantly change the color of the wood and will change pretty much any wood to look the same color. So one of the ones that I've used quite a bit is the Minwax Jacobean stain, but that when you look at the picture on that can of the Jacobean stain, that is basically what you're going to get here. So more modern stains than that are much more aggressive and have much more guaranteed colors. Whereas with these Tried and True stains, they are a very, very subtle change. Again, on the back side, you can see exactly what ash looks like when there's no stain on it. But on the front side, we can see that we've just slightly changed the colors to be either more of a darker gray color or a light or a more medium brown kind of color. On woods like white oak, we have a very subtle change because they're not actually changing the color of the wood like a lot of these more modern chemical stains do. They are just adding more color to the wood to kind of shift it in whatever direction. So if you have a wood like walnut that already has very dark pigments anyway, adding a dark stain to it is not going to change the color at all. But if you have a very light wood like ash, it's going to shift those colors to just be a little more brown or a little bit more darker. So that's the biggest thing to understand if you want to try out these Tried and True stains is that they're a very subtle touch, which on one hand is really good, but on the other hand really bad. So with the dark walnut stain, I think that subtle touch is just perfect. Again, on the ash, I love the color that it brings in. But with the Java stain, I think that's a huge problem because that's the whole point of that stain is to push things to a little bit of that darker gray kind of color to them. And that's where the issue comes in, because in the grains in that of like the ash, you do end up with those nearly black pigments showing up in all the grains there, and it does add a lot of contrast. But your flats don't really change color enough to match with those dark grains. So the dark walnut stain can add in a nice kind of medium to dark brown tone to the wood depending on how many coats you added it. Whereas the Java, I don't quite know what the application would be for it, because in the way that it works right now, it just kind of makes the wood look very grimy and, kind of beat up and old. But again, I think that brings in one of the issues here of the more natural stains. They don't have the penetrating ability, so just the linseed oil doesn't penetrate nearly enough to really get into a lot of the, the flat areas of the wood especially. But the natural pigments also just don't have the power to change the color of the wood nearly as much as, modern chemicals do. So the biggest thing to consider with these stains is that you're not going to be, massively changing the color of the woods. Whatever wood you're using is still going to have some effect on the actual finish that you're going to get out of it. So in closing, I should say whether or not I recommend these stains, and right now it's hard to say. It's really hard to say because I need to actually use them in a project and see how they work on a large scale before I can actually give my recommendation for them. If you have somewhere near you that sells this stuff, then yeah, definitely, they do sell them in smaller cans too, which is probably what I should have ordered. But definitely, if you're interested in them, give them a shot. You've seen a whole bunch of samples here of these two specific stains. You should have a pretty good idea now of what you're gonna get out of the stain. So definitely, if you're interested, give it a shot. But anyways, guys, that's gonna do it for this video. If you have any questions, feel free to let me know. But as always, guys, I do hope you enjoyed it, and I will see you in the next one.